Thank you.
Grazie Presidente. Uno degli scopi
One of the purposes of our request, as was clear from what Mr. Pipink said, is to make sure that Union budget money is not used for research projects that involve the destruction of human embryos. And this means, among other things, changes to the financial regulation of the Union, to the rules of procedure of Parliament, or rather the rules of regulation on the 2020 Horizon regulation, and the declarations of the Commission related to that. Now, I'm going to try to demonstrate why the present regulatory framework is not right in the light of our requests, in the view of our requests. Article 19, paragraph 3 of the regulation setting up the Horizon 2020 research programme establishes that research shall not be financed if it is intended for the human cloning of embryos for reproductive purposes, research to change genetic heritage, and research activities to create human embryos solely for purposes of research or in order to provide stem cells. This is legislation with large gaps in it because it makes it possible to finance research which presupposes the destruction of human embryos. In fact, it's even possible to finance the creation of human embryos if that is not exclusively exclusively for purposes of research or the provision of stem cells. The legislation still says, Article 19, paragraph 4, no research shall be given to research activities which are banned in all member states. What I ask you is this. Is that not an important ethical commitment, not to finance, that is, research banned in all member states? Can we content ourselves with the fact that taxpayers' money is not financing an activity which is illegal on the member states' territories? The same paragraph further says activities shall not be financed in a member state if they are prohibited. And what I ask myself is, if there wasn't that text in the regulation, would it then be possible to finance activities banned in the member state where they were to be carried out? On the contrary, the regulation in force means that you can get community funds even if your activity is illegal in 27 out of 28 member states, because it is legal in one, in the one where you're carrying it out. For example, one state decides to make it legal to create chimeras between men and animals, between humans and animals, then you can get money under the 8th Framework Research, while the other 27 member states are financing this research, which is banned by their own domestic legislation. Obviously, this is opening the road to a race to the bottom in ethical terms. So you can now have to use your taxpayers' money on research which is banned on your territory. This now represents a premium to the member states who have the lowest ethical standards. Now, it's clear that this regulation, and the Commission statements about it as well, don't fix high ethical standards. On the contrary, they legitimize the most dubious practices. The Commission has sought, through its own statements, to set critics' minds at rest. But we consider that these statements are quite insufficient. For example, they say, in its call for proposals, the European Commission doesn't call for the use of embryonic stem cells explicitly. The decision to use those cells is up to researchers in the light of their objectives. Any project that involves using human embryonic stem cells has to pass an independent expert scientific assessment looking into the need for such use of such cells. In other words, essentially, the scientific community is going to be allowed to judge for itself, because it is the one that is fixing the ethical standards that shall apply. The document further says the Commission shall not present to the advisory committee proposals for projects involving the destruction of human embryos. But straight afterwards it says the finance that is not given, the fact that finance is not given to this stage of research will not prevent the Union from financing subsequent stages involving the use of human embryonic stem cells, which shows in the clearest possible way that present practice in the Commission does not satisfy our requirements. There is a serious ethical problem represented by the use of human stem cells for research, and that research can be financed. Essentially, the Commission is inviting people to destroy the embryo with private funds, take the cells, and then ask for public funds to research on them. This is an inconsistent compromise, as was made clear by the Court of Justice of the Human Rights in the Bristol judgment. The Court of Justice of the European Union excluded the possibility of patenting an invention that involved the destruction of human embryos, since that is an activity contrary to human dignity as protected by the Union. Now, it's true, as Mrs. Castex was saying, that there is no ban in European legislation or in the court's case law on research that involves the destruction of human embryos. There is no such ban, probably because it would be member state competence, actually, to have such a ban, to fix such a ban. But what we have is a paradoxical situation in which the European Union, through current law, is financing research whose outcome cannot be patented. And the impossibility of patenting this research derives from the fact that the Union considers that this research is against human dignity, which it is there to protect. I could continue with similar arguments at length, but I think I've already shown that the present legal framework is inadequate, and this is confirmed by practice. Let me remind you that on the internet you can find suggestions of research financed under the 7th Framework Programme enjoying funds from the 7th Framework Programme, 12 million euros worth, whose purposes are alternative testing, as it's called. In other words, developing an alternative to tests on animals. And the alternative would be to replace animals with cells derived from human embryos. Now, our initiative is based on strict ethical and factual argument. The human embryo is a human being. It's one of us, therefore. And since it is one of us, it has human dignity as recognized by the Court of Justice in the Bristol judgment. Since it has human dignity, it is an end in itself. So the embryo cannot be used as a means for some other purpose, as we don't want to be used as a means to some end that has nothing to do with us. Nobody would accept having an adult killed and part of its body used for scientific research, even if that research led to important medical treatments. There are people, as Mr. Pooping said, who are not prepared to accept these important arguments. But here, too, if you take a purely utilitarian and pragmatic approach, let me remind you that even in that light, the Union should not be financing embryonic stem cell research. As already in 2006, it was unlikely enough to argue that this research based on destroying embryos was all that promising. There was a Nobel Prize given to somebody who, instead of developing technologies based on destroying embryos, was doing it on adult cells, and we have a geneticist here in our delegation who will be very happy to go into more specialized details. But in recent decades, the lobbies in favor of the use of human embryonic stem cells have been basing themselves on promises that have turned out to be illusory. We're supposed to be healing all the terrible diseases that we all hope never to have to face. And their elimination was supposed to be imminent. And after more than 10 years, we have to say that all of those promises have turned out to be illusions, that many well-intentioned people's hopes have been dashed. So even in utilitarian and pragmatic terms, it's no major sacrifice for the European Union to have to stop financing this sort of research, which is extremely controversial in ethical terms. We're not calling for the Union's research programme to be stopped. All we're saying is that funds should be released and therefore made available for other important research programs, and giving those other important research programs better prospects, therefore.